Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Green Party series out of Illinois. Welcome here, Calvin Tomaschko, your host, and I'm David Rych, your co-host. How are you, Calvin?
Hey, I'm doing great. This is going to be an exciting night.
This should be an exciting night. So we are suffering some technical difficulties. On our guest tonight is Patrick Conlon, and he is the director of WORCS, and that stands for?
It's WORCS. And so first I'll pop up his information there. So for when he comes on. Yep. And then here's what WORCS stands for. So it's Worker Ownership
Resources and Cooperative Services. So basically, as far as we understand it, WORCS is a organization that attempts to reach out to businesses and get involved in turning those businesses into co-ops, which means employee-owned. And which is a very, very cool thing. I know that unions and co-ops are very dear to my and Calvin's hearts. You know, I was a union steward for about 11 years, and I learned a lot about how amazing unions are, facing a lot of the criticisms, even by union employees who didn't quite understand how they thought as they were throwing $35 away a month and not realizing all the protections and benefits they were getting from these reps every day by fighting with the HR and stuff. It's considerable. It really is. And so I think a big problem with, the Americans have this average tendency to not really appreciate unions. They look down at them. At some point, I think the workforce was close to 30 to 40% unionized, and now it's like 10 maybe percent. And it's definitely dropped down a lot. We have to remember that unions are the ones that built all the stuff for World War II and afterwards built the infrastructures and everything else. Although the labor movement was a huge part of American history from the early mid 1800s till like even the 1930s and 40s. Literally, people died in the streets fighting for our 40-hour a week work week, our vacation time, our sick pay, our weekends off, things like that. Literally, people died fighting for that because the free market capitalism wasn't offering it up freely. So there's that. So much for the free market. So much for the free market. But we have Patrick on tonight. Hopefully, if he can get his technology situated to discuss that. So we're going to go ahead and just chat amongst ourselves here for a little bit, and hopefully Patrick can work that out. And if not, we're going to go end the show early and just get Patrick on another time.
Actually, we're seeing a feed right now, David. So we're going to give it a go. We'll bring him on.
All right, let's do it.
Hey, Patrick, do we have a live feed? Can you hear us?
No, do we?
It looks clear. It's clear and clean.
Right.
You look
got
great.
My homie's phone. My phone just wasn't cutting it. I think it's because I have a version 6 iPhone, and I'm just playing around with old technology. That's what happens, guys. Sorry.
All right,
hey, you found the solution.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah.
We're so happy to have you on. And we just did a quick introduction, but we'll do it again for the folks.
Cool.
We have here Patrick Conlon, Director of Development at WORCS, and then we explained what WORCS is. And we were just starting to talk about union and labor throughout U.S. history. And why don't you take it away and explain a little bit about your organization?
Yeah, so WORCS stands for Worker Ownership Resources and Cooperative Services. So what we do is, we educate, we develop, and we incubate, develop, and also convert businesses into worker cooperatives. What is a worker cooperative? A worker cooperative is an enterprise where the workers are their own board of directors in a one member, one share, one vote, voting and ownership style. It's governed in a democratic fashion, when the workers are their own board of directors, but also, there's different governance structures that would make it just a co-op between a worker self-directed enterprise. But yeah, one of our main goals as an organization would be to, democratize the economy of the United States. And there's a lot of unique opportunities in the United States as we speak in the next 20 years that will actually, will make this actually something viable and not a pipe dream. So we can talk about that more later.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I wanted to take a moment and explain to some folks that the differences between maybe not all worker self-directed enterprises that we hear about, but what's the difference between a worker co-op and, let's say, an ESOP where employees own just some of the stock in the company?
Yeah, no, let's get into that. I usually call most ESOPs are what are called redwashed. You can Google that term. It's actually a real term. I was just kind of flying around as a joke, but it's actually, it's actually a term. So there's about 6,000 ESOPs in the United States, and compared to like 600, worker cooperatives currently in the United States. And ESOPs are better than traditional firms. ESOP, but they're but in what way? It's kind of funny when we say that, but it's like it's more of like a lot of times it's like stock options and a retirement plan, like a good 401k. You have stock options, but you can't really exercise power of like a one share, one vote. And a lot of ESOPs are really funny or kind of interesting. Is like the people that own the majority of the shares are actually the management, not actually the workers themselves. And that's actually really key to understand that is because, there's, Winco is a famous one, or Publix is another famous one. There's a few other ESOPs that are interesting. Some ESOPs are, the employees own part of it. And it's more of like a tax break, scheme, for a lot of big companies. So it's, you just have to, like I said, you have to, when it comes to the word ESOP, that's a really mixed bag of tricks. Not all ESOPs are terrible. The ESOPs, like I said, the workers themselves are not necessarily the boards of directors or making up the board of directors. And the workers themselves are not usually, or not always, the majority owners, for instance. And it's a one share, one vote kind of situation, not one member, one vote situation.
Oh, wow.
And so that's a key difference between an ESOP and like a worker co-op. Not all ESOPs are bad. I actually promote ESOPs for large companies because turning mega companies into worker co-ops is actually like, that's kind of like a task that's so mind jarring to me that like maybe turning it into an ESOP and then working it into a co-op over like a 10-year transition period would make a little bit more sense, just because of the nuts and bolts of a large organization. It's just not so simple. But that would be a good way to put it.
Yeah, and I want to hop in one more time and then, of course, let David ask some questions. But I wanted to highlight for our audience that an ESOP is an employee stock ownership program.
Planner program,
thank you. Yeah. And that's where, employees will get certain stock options within the company. Usually, so your traditional big firms are going to have the ones that are parsed out into stocks. That is where anyone who out on the market can buy up stocks. Usually the board of directors owns the majority share of the stocks, right? And then they make the decisions for the company.
Well, no. So the board of directors may not own the majority of stocks, but they're elected. Okay. They're elected by the people that own the majority of the stocks.
Thank you. That's the difference.
So but you could be right in certain circumstances, and the kind of the best way to elaborate what I'm talking about is, if you look at like boards of directors for like, let's say the 3,000 to 5,000 major companies that do 75% of all the, sales receipts, in American society, you look at their board of directors and you're going to see a lot of those same board of directors on each other's boards. Like it's incestuous in a way, but a lot of times it's a way for, to consolidate resources within corporate America, but also a lot of those people are elected by the shareholders. Now, most businesses that are huge, let's say it's like a publicly owned company, or like, let's say Disney. We all like The Mandalorian or Star Wars, right? They bought up Disney like 8 years ago or something like that. I don't know, I remember. But like it's so, just so everyone knows what that is. But like, so Disney, might have millions of people that own shares in it, and that's true. It's publicly traded. But normally how the nature works of, corporate America is they have what are called bulk shareholders, and bulk shareholders are people that own like anything from like 5%, 10%, 20% of the stock, and then usually there's like 5 to 10 people that fit into that kind of mold or that kind of characteristic. They're the people that own enough shares that if they call the CEO will call them back, type of thing. Just to kind of give you an idea of the power. And together they usually are the ones that elect the board of directors. They're the Democratic unit, quote unquote, and there might be millions of people that own stock, and you're always welcome to go to the shareholder meetings to learn about the annual report and everything that's going on in the business. But once it comes down to voting, sure, you can exercise your vote, but it's kind of funny. It's an exercise, not really like an actualization.
So if somebody, for example, owns 500 stock units, they're going to get 500 votes for who's going to be a rep on the board. And who's going to make decisions for the enterprise. Whereas like the workers, even if it is an ESOP, they're probably not going to have a major voting power on their own. Not like at a worker cooperative where it's one worker, one vote. It's going to be the employee has a certain amount of stock allotted to them or none at a traditional firm, unless they can afford it. And then
and it depends on a few things. I think there's like 10 ESOPs that are actually democratically run. Now, in theory, you can have an ESOP that is, if it's structured a certain way, that can be relatively democratic, where like, let's say a union is involved and the union, and everyone's unionized and it's a closed shop or something. Yeah. Then like technically, I guess you could, work it that way, but you'll still have those kind of, internal contradictions within that firm. But most ESOPs, like I said, it's like the management, or it's usually the people that get paid the most, which is management, are the ones that own most of the shares. So if there is any kind of collective voting power, within a firm, it would probably be with management.
Got it.
Right. Okay.
And could you imagine in an ESOP when the workers themselves are, let's say they do own the majority altogether and they started to organize so they can use their voting? Do you think that's going to happen?
Right. No. Yeah, I know that Woodman's is. Yeah, I've heard of the about companies that are employee owned, and I never really heard the word ESOP applied to that. I know there's a Woodman's over here that's employee owned, and I was kind of tickled about that, and try to go there as often as I can to support it. Do you know anything about Woodman's? I mean, is that? No?
I don't know, man. There's a lot of employee owned stuff. You guys are in Chicago, so I just don't spend a lot of time in that part of the country. Right, you're in Chicago or somewhere in Illinois, I think.
Near Chicago, yeah. Where he's he's in Chicago proper. I'm north of Chicago. Where are you?
I'm in Southern California.
Yeah.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Calvin, you didn't tell me that. I thought you were like.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to leave it out, but yeah.
No, I mean, I guess it's not really relevant, but I just for some reason thought you were like my neighbor or something.
No, I just know a lot of the co-op movement. So
okay, right on.
Help. I'm like, here you go. He's a lawyer that practices in Illinois. Here's some people just north of you, that are in a co-op movement. Here's this, here's that. I just
great. No, absolutely. No, we're glad to have you. So let's talk a little bit about the history of the labor movement here in America. Kind of trickling over from Europe, I guess. Karl Marx and his Communist Manifesto kind of didn't really ignite it. There was stuff going on before that, but it really kind of solidified it and gave it kind of direction and intellectual underpinning. Go ahead.
Well, what happened was there was the 1848 revolutions, and a bunch of lefties had to skip town. So and a lot of them
came here.
A lot of them came here. No, a lot of people don't know this. Like the Republican Party, for instance, was like 1/3 socialists, and
no kidding.
A lot of people don't know that.
I didn't know that.
The first Republican Party were actually socialists from Germany, and
I love that.
And for instance,
I can't wait to tell my Republican friends that.
Yeah, we had straight communists. We had straight communists in the Civil War that were our generals, because they were badass generals during the 1848 revolutions of Germany.
Nice.
And if you read like Abe Lincoln, there's like these socialistic kind of writings. It's because he had a hot iron from like a part of a section of his party that were just giving him the business of like, he had pressure from within his own party from a lot of these immigrant groups, and also the diaspora from, the 1848 revolutions, a lot.
That's really interesting. I did not know that. I know that Karl Marx wrote him a letter, like kind of praising him for what he was doing for, the slaves and to free the slaves and so on. So.
Well, yeah, he had a lot of followers though in the United States, like a lot of people don't know. And Karl Marx, I think, wrote periodicals in the New York Times, or there was some kind of newspaper here in the States.
Okay.
He would do some commission work for.
Yeah,
I understand.
Very interesting. So then, unionism, the labor movement was hot and heavy for decades, and did a lot of good. Gave us the 40-hour work week, vacation time, weekends off, benefits, the adding of child labor laws, that kind of thing, overtime pay, so on. Etc. And unions were a bigger deal back in the day. I would want to say up until like about the 40s, maybe late 40s, early 50s. And you started seeing a decline in the appreciation of unions and the affection towards unions. And now I want to say that at some point the highest was like 35 to 40% of the workforce, maybe 30 to 35%.
Private workforce, and there's public workforce.
That is true. But now it's like less than 10 or about 10%. So there was a massive decline in unionization in America. Do you have a theory, a speculation as to why that happened?
Well, I don't have a theory. I know what happened.
Okay, good. Facts are good.
So the union. So what happened was during the 1930s, there was the Great Depression, and what that did was it caused so much trauma, within the United States, that what happened was people that didn't even know what a union was, or their parents never knew what it was. There was a giant union drive and mass solidarity. And a lot of it had to do with the material conditions, that a lot of Americans were facing during this part of time. And they all came together, formed unions, and there was even cooperative very maybe not worker cooperative, but different cooperative formations that were formed in California and other parts of the country and things like that. They created it was a coalition between the CIO, which broke off from the AFL. Because the AFL is more craft union organized. They're kind of racist and they're kind of rigid. It was just a really rigid conservative kind of organization. So God, I can't remember his name. There was not Gompers, but it was John Lewis and some of his associates who were in the upper rankings of the AFL said, you know what, we're going to organize by industry, right? And then what happened was, like, in 1935, which is the same year like the Wagner Act, was passed, and some of the other pro-union legislation was passed. He created the CIO, and what happened was when he created the Congress of Industrial Organizations, he absorbed a lot of unskilled labor. Now, that's a very key thing that needs to be understood of why that was significant, because which unions were in the unskilled labor rackets, or the markets, labor markets, where that the AFL didn't touch, and that was the Communist Party of the United States, the IWW, and the hardcore of the hardcore. And what happened was he had to absorb the hardcore of the hardcore into his union. And I think it was like 1/3 to 25% of his union were Communist Party members. And now what happened was, during the 1930s, there were about 100,000 Communist Party members. How many people were in the military during that time?
Is that a rhetorical question or an actual question?
It's an actual question.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
The same number.
Oh my goodness.
So
wow.
Because it was a joke. I mean, we were practicing with sticks in the U.S. military, so it was kind of a joke, right? So it was like, it wasn't serious, because we de-escalated after World War I. We just got rid of it, except for like the talent, the people that with skills and things that we needed just to retain. The people we need to retain was an absolute necessity. But so, there was also two socialist parties. There was some kind of like Trotskyist party or something like that. They're in the Socialist Workers Party. There was another socialist party, I think. I don't quote me on this one, but I think it had to do with the sewer socialists, from Wisconsin.
Maybe. Yeah.
I think that was the other socialist party at that time. There was a CIO, there was a coalition, but together they were so powerful that they were able to break the back of, American politics, where, they created general strikes. I mean, 1934 was such a momentous year in labor history. It's really hard to really fathom, really. And what happened was, through World War II, the unions were pretty powerful. But then in 1945, 1946, something happened. That was the last general strike in American history. Now, COVID shut down about 30% of the economy. This general strike / strike wave, because it was both a general strike and a strike wave all in once, just like in 1934, shut down about 40% of the economy at the time, as all the people were coming back home from, they're coming back home from, World War II, and they were like, hey, we're fighting for democracy. Why don't we have any here? So, you know what I mean? Like, so, it's kind of funny. But then what happened was, like, Taft-Hartley was passed. And Taft-Hartley, I'm not a scholar on Taft-Hartley, so I'm not like the guy, but let's just say it made it really hard to organize. It made general strike or solidarity strikes illegal.
Yep.
It made it very difficult. And I don't want to get into the details because, and you can always, people, listening can always read about this. But then what happened was that actually kind of kickstarted McCarthyism. Now, McCarthyism was really interesting because, sure, they got rid of some troublemakers that were loyal to Stalin. Sure, there were unions out there that were like that, and there were people like that, but they got rid of everything left of center. So the right wing wanted to break down that New Deal coalition because they knew FDR wasn't the problem, because FDR was their little buddy that they would hang out with and, talk about stocks all day with, and so they realized it wasn't FDR that was the issue. He was one of us to some degree, because there was no evidence that FDR would ever do a New Deal. They realized it was those coalitions. So they had to figure out how to break those coalitions. And so they would send the FBI to your, principal if you were a teacher somewhere, or they would, find a way to get you fired or on a blacklist somewhere, so you would be destitute. And so if anyone else felt the same way you did, they would shut up and not, say anything, or they would get rid of they would do deportations. Let's just say it was pretty gnarly. They maybe 10% of it was legitimate, and then 90% of it was not.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, not at all. Right. And anyway, and pretty much they stigmatized So they got rid of all the political organizations that gave that created the common sense of why a union made sense. So now, like nowadays, there's all this anti-union talk, and a lot of it's bullshit. I mean, it's like rare to find like a strong argument somewhere like against it, but it's not like a strong argument. It just might be like, oh, I had a bad experience.
Right.
You had a bad experience with all state insurance. Like
Right.
that's kind of the what I mean?
Right,
That's kind of like the kind of complaints I hear about it. Maybe it's some kind of negative, just that kind of shit, So it's like, so it's kind of interesting where it wasn't like it had a decline and slowly degenerate. No, it got pretty blunt. It got blunted, and then it got slowly eroded. Through, I would say maybe through 2-3 generations of just slow erosion, and plus, the capitalism changed. Capital became more mobile, but labor did not. So that's what's happening is the battlefield has changed as well,
Right.
where, capital is playing on a whole different level than I think labor is at this point, where it was kind of like there wasn't an asymmetry of war like there is now back then, where, if we were to have some kind of rearrangement or reorganization of the economy, it could have happened then, or it could happen now too. But I mean, it's just, we're not playing on the same kind of battlefield. And I think unions haven't caught up, with, the 21st century economy. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the final push to make it harder to organize and to unionize would be stuff like right to work laws, and then other laws that are like card check to end a union.
And a lot of that came after, came when, unions were on their decline. It was just like more nails in the coffin, as time went on. But I think after the 70s, there was Milton Friedman was a very powerful person when it came to putting a lot of, just brainworms into a lot of people, where it's, I mean, he was not a dumb guy. I mean, but he just had a really, he was very persuasive. And it was during a time when Keynesianism there was not a lot of theoretical strength during the 1970s that could have got us out of a lot of those crises during that time, where Keynesianism was at its like wit's end as well. So, but to replace Keynesianism, we went back to like some kind of neoliberalism or neoclassical economics, as they call it, where it was just kind of like a new repackaged form of what was going on before the Great Depression, as far as how our economic system was. And then Reagan took over, and they created all really creative ways of how to break their back. I mean, the New Deal coalition too was dead by that time. A lot of the people that were still in office, previously that would have prevented someone like Reagan from taking over, or if he did take over, just would limit his ability to do anything. They were all dead by that time, or most of them were dead. And so the country's politics died. The New Deal coalition died in 1968. When there was a lot of fractions in the Democratic Party, because a lot of the white Southerners were no longer farmers. They went to the suburbs, for instance, so, and then there was a lot of the legislation of the 60s alienated them. So what happened was they were previously like allies, but like they're kind of like the person you had to like apologize for at parties. For like that.
I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, he's like, I mean, that's the only way I can really put it.
No, that's a good analogy.
Like the only way I can put it politely, like where, FDR couldn't get civil rights legislation done because he needed their support, in order to create the New Deal. You know what I mean? So because they were economically liberal but socially conservative type of thing. So it's like they were really a really tough crowd to deal with. But by the time of the 1960s, they were no longer that constituency.
Right.
They changed because they were no longer farmers. A lot of them gave up farming by the 1950s and 60s, and went into the suburbs, and but they still carried a lot of their social attitudes towards other sorts of members of our community. With a lot of hostility. So the dynamics changed too. There was a lot of right-wing backlash against the New Deal by the 1980s. And that we're kind of still living today. And we're still, what we're seeing now, though, I think why we're starting to see co-ops and, other, labor organizations starting to revive is because I think we're entering what's called a seventh party system, where the New Deal situation, the triumphs of the New Deal had a lot to do with the fifth party system and kind of the networks of different constituencies that were all coming together to form what was the Democratic Party or what was the left wing or whatever, to get those kinds of objectives done. So,
wow. So I wanted to reference your website there, your resources tab at worksusa.org, and that's works spelled with a C. And then /resources. If you go to the resources tab and scroll down, there's cooperatives throughout history. And I think it's really cool to hear that great history. Thank you, by the way, for summarizing that for us and for our listeners. And throughout that whole history, there's been these veins, these surviving and thriving instances of worker cooperatives. I mean, we've got one here starting at 1752, where it was first successful cooperative when Benjamin Franklin formed the Philadelphia contribution ship for the insurance of houses.
That's still there, by the way.
Yeah, and it says that in the next line. Still one of the oldest continuing cooperatives. So from the beginning, we've had cooperatives. I've heard of cooperatives in the segregation era in Black neighborhoods where they were able to come together cooperatively and thrive in their businesses. So there's just been this presence throughout time. So unions have been hugely important. We love unions. We love democratizing the workplace in that regard and having that fight. But I also really, really appreciate worker cooperatives where workers are the owners. Can you talk a little bit about so you mentioned there's a resurgence for worker cooperatives lately. Tell us a bit about that. How are you seeing that? And then what do you think is coming next?
Yeah, I mean, there's, how would I start this? Worker cooperatives have always had a presence, to some extent, in American society, whether it's big or small. I think the best analogy that I've ever heard of would be capitalism started in it's been around since Roman times, but it's never been able to thrive and dominate, the entire economic system until the technology, the communication technologies, transportation technologies, and energy technologies were, gave it the gas they needed in order to become the dominant economic system above feudalism or even some kind of slavery system, whether it was in Roman times or even American history. So, a lot of I think the biggest thing or the biggest kind of thing I would bring up in cooperative history and American history would be during the Knights of Labor, where they had about 200 worker cooperatives during the 1870s and 1880s until they, disappeared, for the Haymarket riots or Haymarket uprising or however you want to say it. But, they had a PR disaster, let's say in 1886, right? So, but until that time, there was a lot of worker cooperatives. There was about 200 of them. And so cooperative economics has always been, part of American society. But they've had kind of a tortured history. Even Robert Owen tried getting something done, in Indiana, in 1844, for instance, and, it failed. I mean, the barn burnt down. I have a feeling it was probably some local farmer hating what was going on, so he's let's just destroy their stuff. That kind of, I mean, I have a strong feeling that's probably what it was. Because there's a lot of resistance to this kind of stuff, or at least there was previously. So there's the IWW, for instance, were very pro co-ops, very pro co-op, and even when Big Bill Hayward went to the Soviet Union, he got sponsored by Lenin, to go do Project Kuzbaz, where it was a bunch of Americans to go do a cooperative project out in the middle of Siberia. And if you're interested in reading about that, it's called Project Kuzbaz. But, and they're Americans. They wanted to bring Taylorism and other kinds of interesting production techniques, to, cooperatives and things like that. There was a lot of cooperatives in the 1930s. It's just been it's a very spotty history in American history. That's kind of the best way to put it, where it was kind of built out of struggle. Where a lot of workers or a lot of people come together, realizing in solidarity that they can make it together if they're able to cooperate with each other. And, there's a bunch of documentaries on a resource page about African-American cooperatives. And I think it was Collective Courage, I think was the name of the documentary. There's even a paper that I found that FDR got commissioned in 1937, because during the depths of the Depression, what was really interesting is, yes, the union movement was, very strong, but a lot of people don't really realize that a lot of those movements, the reason why the New Deal was made was because a lot of the people from the bottom up were saying reform or revolt, and that was really the debate of, like, should we revolt in creative revolution like they did in Russia, or should we reform the system, because there might be some that might be a lot more it might be bloodless. We can get what we need, at least to some extent, without risking a whole lot, risking our families or risking our assets or whatever we have, our farms or whatever. But so as a result, FDR actually sent a commission out in 1937, and he had people like research cooperatives out in Western Europe. And it's kind of mind blowing, reading this book that I read that, he got commissioned, and they're talking about all the cooperatives in Western Europe, and to see how successful they were, and everything like that. And none of them until like really Mondragon have really scaled up in a way, so that's kind of the thing, is cooperatives had issues scaling up, and I think that just has to do with technology. So what's happening now is, we've seen Mondragon scale, they have issues and they've made mistakes and things like that, but they've found ways to scale up through like lateral, like creating lateral organizations, where if they get too big, they just cleave off their organization and have like some kind of, like, let's say it's a grocery store and there's 500 members, where they're like, okay, great, we're going to cleave off the bakery section, and that's going to be its own co-op, and then we're going to have a mother co-op, mother organization, and we're going to be connected that way, and we're going to be like sister co-ops in a way. So they figured that out. But I think what's really happening is, like, in the United States, like where we're going with the cooperative movement is we're very behind, certain parts of the world when it comes to cooperative development. Italy, for instance, has 1 out of 55 people, for instance, are a member of a worker co-op in Italy. They have it in their constitution. Nice. And there's parts of Italy, like the Emilia-Romagna region, where it's like 40% worker co-ops, is the percentage of their economy.
Wow.
Spain has Mondragon, which is like maybe a fifth, or sorry, like not a fifth, but like 5 to 10% of their economy, at least in the Basque region, if not the entire country. It's like the 5th to 8th biggest company in the entire country. It seems to go back and forth between 5th and 8th, or 5th and 10th. Whatever, doesn't matter. Top 10. It's one of the top 10 organizations. But I think what's going to happen is, like, in the United States has a really unique situation where we have what's called the Silver Tsunami. And the Silver Tsunami is, like, most mid to small size businesses, and I'm talking about like businesses that are maybe like 50 employees or less, are going to change hands in the next 20 years.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And the reason why is
Silver Tsunami.
Yeah, and it's because all the baby boomers own like 70% of these businesses, and they're not going to pass it down to their kids, because their kids, 65% of them don't want them. Like, I'm actually kind of one of those kids. My father owns some business I had no interest in taking over. I just want to do it, and good thing, because that whole industry got, monopolized or oligopolized, so but to explain it is, like, there could be several things that could happen, right? So one thing that could, because this also could be the Silver Tsunami could also be a disaster, right? Don't get me wrong, it could also mean more it could also mean corporate America gets more assets and consolidates their power even more than they have now, which is hard to imagine, but it's the thing about they're just starting to pick up all the small people.
I mean, they're doing it in real estate already. And so
it's horrible.
Yeah.
Even like it's like a disaster in real estate, and that could happen across the economy. And so imagine this. So there's a few things that could happen, right? So corporate America could buy these things because they're just trying to gobble up all their smaller competition, because they don't want their competition, the other oligarchs, to buy it. They want to buy it first. So they're just gobbling it all up, right? So that's one thing that could happen. Another thing could happen is no one wants to buy it, and they have to scrap it for parts, and it just goes out of business because no one wants to buy it, right? And then the third thing is the workers could purchase it. Mm-hmm. And the issue, though, of the workers purchasing it is not because the workers can't. It's most places the workers don't even know this is an option.
Right.
They have no idea. And that's really the biggest thing I've ever ran into when it comes to these kinds of things. And because I go to workplaces all the time, be like, hey, have you guys ever thought about worker co-op? No, I've never. And then I literally do a presentation in front of an entire workforce, and just the look on their eyes going, you know, like, it's just,
we can do
What?
that.
yeah, like,
so could you actually expand on that, the process you go through to like bring this education to the workers and talk to them about it? Like, what do you do?
And then real quick, before you answer that question, I think it's a great question. I'm going to pop up on the screen. We're the Illinois Green Party series here, and we have guests on every Monday night at 8 p.m. We're streaming it live on Facebook and on YouTube. You guys are welcome to leave comments. We might be able to get some questions on the show. And also, if you have any future topics or guests you'd like to for us to have on, just let us know in the comments, and we'll respond to you. All right, back to it. Oh, and then to let everyone know, if you just arrived, we are talking with Patrick Conlon, Director of Development at WORCS. And here's what WORCS stands for: Worker Ownership Resources and Cooperative Services.
rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? That's why we
That's
call
right.
it. All right. Yeah, so we'll talk about this process. You know, the process of it's like an educational process, right? So what happens is, like, I have this like Facebook group called like Richard Wolf's, like, and it's just really just a kind of a troll group, and just people just like, shit posting and things like that. But I'm finding it as like a really good tool though, to find like people that are co-op minded, because even though people are kind of like saying funny stuff in there all the time or just crazy things, I notice they're all pro co-op people. Doesn't matter what you think of them, and like we'll find people there, or we'll just find people through our networks and things like that. I mean, there's multiple ways we can find different workers or owners and things like that. And what ends up happening is I get someone interested enough, and then I go, okay, great, put me on a Zoom call, or let me talk to all your workers. And sometimes it could be as small as maybe like 3. Sometimes it could be as large as 50 people that I'm being thrown in front. So it's kind of like all across the board. And what's happening is I do what's called a seed meeting. And because I'm planting a seed in their minds, because like a lot of times they're not going to be like, let's do a co-op. A lot of times I have to sell them on the idea. I'm like P.T. Barnum, when it comes to selling co-ops. It's like an LM. It's like a multi-level marketing strategy. No, I feel kind of like it's just funny. It's just like I'm like a circus, when I go and I'm putting on a show for them, and yeah, because I'm like, I thought about
your top hat.
Everything about buying your boss out, great. And it's just like
sign here.
In America, people just can't like imagine this.
It doesn't. It doesn't compute, right?
And that's why I call it a circus. It's because it's like I'm blowing their minds. Like, wow, he performed a trick for us, but it's really kind of sad though, because it's like. But what's interesting though is I'll go in front of them, and I have a presentation. Usually I have it tailored towards certain kinds of crowds and stuff like that. And I keep it very PC. I keep it very professional and things like that. But I just talk about the benefits of worker co-ops. Like what could be done. Like why would you even consider this? Like why do this? I'll also talk about like why no one's ever heard of a worker co-op before, because usually it's like, oh, these are so great, then why haven't I never heard of these before? And and usually I have a way of tricking them into those questions, because I know they always come. And like for instance, the first question I ask is, who's ever heard of a worker co-op before? And then usually 3 people out of 50 will raise their hand. And the only reason why they know it is because there's some other random little co-op effort, locally, maybe, that happens, right. Like it's obscure. It's something obscure happens locally, and a few people that are, they're paying attention, and that's if I'm lucky. There's maybe 3 that know what they are, but what's interesting though is by the time they ask the question again, I trick them, because I'm like, great, what was the first question I asked everybody? Who's ever heard of a worker co-op? Well, that's the reason why there's not any, because none of you ever heard of them. So got you, But I mean, I talk about the history a little bit about it. Like I talk about Mondragon. I'll talk about how it has like 84,000 members. I'll talk about how it does $26 billion a year. I'll talk about how they federate. I'll talk about, they do anything from farm chickens to, high end, technological manufacturing or R&D and things like that. So they're kind of all over the board on, the things that they produce, the services or the things they produce. Like I talked to one of their, I'm getting more in contact with their tech people for their tech platform co-ops and stuff like that, Mondragon. And so I'll talk about that. I'll talk about Emilia Romagna. I'll talk about some of the politics sometimes, a little bit about it. I'll talk about why aren't there more? Because that's a really, why are there only 600 co-ops in the United States? And it's actually a very complicated answer. It's not actually like, oh, because they're trying to keep people down. It's like, well, no, yes, but it's only really part of the problem. It's, I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than just that. It's part of this little complex recipe of, why they're not there, but it's the salts. It's not like it's not the basil or the, the other ingredients, so it's a really big stew of different things. I feel like, why worker co-ops are, I'll talk about those things. For instance, I'll talk about what it would look like if your business became a worker co-op, because really the first thing, in order for something to be a viable worker co-op, the workers have to care about democracy or
and know what it is.
Yeah. No, really. I mean, they have to know what it is, or they have to value it to some extent. Because what happens is I'll go into some workplaces that are so toxic where they all hate each other. Right. I'm like, okay, great. All right, have a nice day. And I'm just out because I don't want to turn it into a co-op because it's just going to implode the first day.
There ain't nothing cooperative about that place. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or exactly. There's nothing cooperative about that. And really. But there are a lot of places where it is like that, where there's a caring culture, or a lot of people respect each other enough to go in business with each other and start a co-op. So there are certain things I look for, but really that seed meeting is really like a first board meeting. We treat it like a board meeting, because what happens is I try to see if I can get people to ask questions or structure, see if we can get a structure in the meeting and just be like, guys, it's very low pressure. It's a very low pressure meeting. It's a very low structure meeting, but I try to tell them see how we had, we had a back and forth dialogue like this. This is kind of like the semblance of what I'm looking for, is kind of you guys working together, and I mean, sure, co-ops are a lot more complicated than that, but I mean, really just to see if the culture is there. Because really one of the big things of identifying whether something can be a co-op or not, it has to do with ideological reasons, just like in a traditional business. You need that entrepreneur that thumps his chest and goes, yeah, and I'm going to, be an entrepreneur because I want to be Elon Musk. And, and I want to be like Daddy Musk. And there are a lot of people that I meet, not a lot, but I mean, there are people in the business world where you do meet where they have that libertarian kind of mindset of I'm the one, I took all the risk in doing that, blah, blah, blah. Well, there's a lot of people that don't think like that at all.
Right.
And they are actually potential social entrepreneurs. And there's a lot of people that would rather work at a co-op and are capable of working at a co-op. But the problem is there's, a lot of it has to do with ideology. Yeah. Can this group actually work together and solve their problems? Is really a big question, because some places cannot. They either lack the capacity, or they lack the culture, or they lack I don't know what it is. I mean,
I think it has a lot to do with just how America thinks about these things, and how we're conditioned to think about these things. I worked in the restaurant and bar industry for a long time, and I remember just bringing up the idea of pooling tips. They thought I was trying to steal their children or something. Because this person's too lazy, I'm not sharing his tips with him. I get bigger tips than he does, and that kind of thing. Blah blah blah. And they don't understand that they're actually all working together anyway, and so they're all sharing each other's labors and their profits and that kind of thing in the first place. You're running food for everybody and that kind of thing. You're running drinks for everybody. They are in fact cooperating. They just don't realize that should the outcome of that should be to pull the tips together and make it more equal. But there's just a huge resistance to that. Huge resistance. I'm not sharing my tips with this guy. Good.
Yeah, no, like production itself is actually socialized. It's just where surpluses go a lot of times.
Right, exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
like it's fascinating.
Right. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and then there's the ideas of rugged individualism. So
Right.
the idea of working cooperatively and not just working your own and working for your own wage and only focusing on you and your entity moving throughout the workplace. Thinking about all of the workers as a collective, as a unit, making decisions together, just is outside of the realm of like cultural acceptance. I think through kindergarten all the way up through college, you know, unless you're taking a specialty course, you're not going to be introduced to the idea of a worker cooperative.
Right.
Yeah. So
this is your money. You earn this money. They think that they earn the money alone, like in a vacuum, and nobody has ever earned a single penny alone. It hasn't happened ever. Okay.
Well, yeah. I think too, like there's a lack. I think the big, so like I said, when it comes to these kinds of things, there's a lack of institution building. Like for instance, like, you know, WORCS is one of like maybe a handful of organizations around the country. And 10 years ago when WORCS was founded, or maybe sooner, I mean, the founder will like to say it was founded in 2006, but I like paper trails, so I say 2010. And so I'm not gonna, yeah. I mean,
okay.
Put on our website all the paper trail from back like 10 years ago of like us, you know, doing our thing. But it's like, but anyways, like if you were gonna start a business, where can you go to start a business and get help? Well, there's business schools, there's Chamber of Commerce's, there's the Small Business Association or administration and for loans and things.
Mm-hmm.
There's banks that will give you money because they understand what a you know, what a business is, and they, you know, see, you know, if they'll loan money to you. So if you want to join a union, you can go to a union hall. You know, there's not as many as there used to be, or it wasn't like it used to be, but they're still there to some capacity in certain parts of the country, right? Okay, great. So if you want to start a worker cooperative,
where do you go? Yeah.
Go to WORCS. WORCS.
Yeah. So
yeah, nowadays, you know what you do? You just Google it.
Yeah,
and you'll find it.
There's a little bit more now than there was, you know, maybe 5 years ago. You know, I will say that there was a lot more going on. There's a lot more going on now. But what's happening is, you know, if you want to start a co-op, I mean, I talk to people all the time out there in the woodwork, you guys included, you know, where like it's like, hey, you know, we have like this like, you know, steering committee. We want to form a co-op and we need help. And you guys are, you know, like needing help. But like I'm literally the first guy you've ever talked to in some kind of institutional capacity that has the ability to help you guys out. It's happening. I mean, it's funny, but it's not, you know, it's kind of like, because I'm not like, I'm in Southern California. I shouldn't be the guy helping you guys out in Chicago. Like in a perfect world, we shouldn't even really know each other necessarily, because I mean, no offense. It's just more of like, the only reason why like I'm helping you guys out or you guys need help is because it's like, I know there's no one else to help you.
Yeah, and we're talking about I'm part of a worker cooperative steering committee currently, so that's how Patrick and I met each other.
Yeah, well, I think you came to my Richard Wolf troll posting group.
Yeah, love that page.
Yeah, that was great.
We need to try to get him on the show, by the way. I love
that'd be fun. Yeah, of course.
Cool. I shot for Chomsky and he didn't reply. But
you guys want Wolf on your show?
Yes, I want Wolf on my show.
Yeah, we'll take.
Do you know him?
I do.
Oh boy.
There's photos of me and him all over the internet, you know.
Yeah.
So,
that would be excellent.
I can ask, but I warn you, like, he isn't like who he was 6 years ago, where like he was, you know, when I was in the Green Party of Orange County, he's like, yeah, I'll go do some random ass, you know, like show for you guys. Like, so
he's higher profile now.
Dude's busy. Yeah, he's flying across the country.
He complains how he needs a plan for bathroom breaks now. So it's like, you understand, like, it's if he says no, don't take it personally.
No, of course not.
Yeah, like I've been listening to Wolf for 8 years, so he used to answer my questions on his show like on the regular.
Oh, nice.
Because he didn't no one was listening to his stuff 8 years ago like they are now.
Right.
So, like, you know what I mean? Like, I had.
Well, you connected with Chomsky. Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, if you could reach out to him, that would be appreciated for sure.
I'll reach out to the board. I'll reach out to the board of Democracy at Work, because they asked me, hey, yeah, Wolf loves you, but he's busy. So because I used to ask him random questions, still thinking it was still 2014, but like, you know,
that'd be great.
Yeah.
We only have a few minutes left, about 6 or 7 minutes left here, or even I don't have my glasses on. Anyway, Calvin, did you want to ask another question?
Oh, I wanted to follow up a little bit on the Silver Tsunami. There is a positive side to it, and I think you can sell this to plenty of the, retiring age owners. And that is like, hey, you like your business, you like serving this community, you've gotten to know this community, you trust your workers that you've worked with a long time. Why not transfer it over, rather as a, more of a takeover, why not as a transfer? And you guarantee your legacy in this community. You guarantee that this community continues to get the service that you want. Because if you sell it off to a big firm and the big firm chooses to liquidate it, or move it outside of the state or outside of the area, well, then your community is not getting served. Those people that you've served for however many years you own the business, well, they're not getting that same service, or they're getting the same service, but it's from a crappy franchise chain. So I imagine there are quite a few, Silver Tsunami aged owners out there who would gladly put the trust of the future of their business, the future of their legacy, in the hands of the workers that have brought it along all the way, and they've provided the value along all the way. But not every owner knows that or recognizes that.
Yeah, no, I've actually talked to some business owners that have that kind of mindset. I think those are easy sells.
Mm-hmm.
They're not who I'm actually worried about. I'm worried about the people that don't care as much, but they do have a workforce that are capable. Like they might hate their employees, but but the thing is, I want to find ways I can be like, hey, here's some money, you can leave now, bye. So it's
Right.
I want to find a way where we can convince them, either through like getting legislation passed where it's like you can get a tax break if you sell to employees. So because what the biggest problem too that I've run into about like why an owner like might like their employees or maybe doesn't care about them, like he wants to get, because it has to do with their retirement. They want to get the biggest bang for their buck, so they'll sell to anybody for the highest price. So that's the issue that we're kind of dealing with when it comes to the Silver Tsunami, or that I've seen, is we need a little bit more structural help than just selling to their employees. Because like the value-based thing, yes, there are people out there that will do it. I've talked to them. Great, easy sell of the idea, but the industry and the economy is so much more complex than that.
Okay.
And people's values, the owner, like someone might have like a horrible company or like horrible values, but his employees are like not, they're actually okay, like, so it's like, what I mean? Like they're okay people. So it's like,
so you want to have the best offer for that owner, so that owner just takes it.
because I want systematic change. You see what I'm saying? I'm not a boutique activist where, I want to have a cool co-op so I can be like, hey guys, look at me.
Cool.
I created a few, like I'm in this to win this. I'm in this to, I think,
Good.
if we can create like at least 40% of the economy worker cooperatives by 2050 at least, there's going to have to be structural changes or structural help to do that. Because what's going to happen is if we can create like 40% of the economy or some ridiculous, like hard, really big, significant part of the economy to be worker co-ops, they are going to start manipulating the market to help reproduce themselves at the expense of traditional capitalism.
Nice.
Right.
I like that. Very cool.
Right.
And there's also other things that are going to get us out of capitalism, but cooperatives are one of the handful of things. I mean, technological advances in energy and transportation and all this other stuff. So like, but it's, but co-ops are going to be a big part of that as well. And so that's why I'm focusing a lot on, co-ops, because I think that's going to be the kind of the meat and bones of like, production. But yeah, the Silver Tsunami is not as cut and dry and easy as you think it is.
Gotcha.
There are challenges. I mean, I can get financing for conversions. I mean, that's not a problem for me or anything because I know where to find it. I know where to find the money and get things rolling. It's just like convincing the owner in certain situations where it's like, I would love to sell the workers, but this guy's offering me like, $1 million more than, what you guys are offering me. And this is my retirement. And, and I can't mess around like that. It's just too much money to turn down. So it's like, but if we had some kind of capital gains tax, or I don't know, think of like any kind of tax, that they would get from selling the business that, oh, you sold to the employees. Great. Well, even if that company is selling for that much more, it doesn't matter because your tax breaks are so nice. that it went to the workers, and those I'm not, for tax breaks for, people that are wealthy, but in this case I am, if it helps get it in the right people's hands, so that's
we've got 6 minutes left here. I wanted to touch on right of first refusal, and you also mentioned another policy option which I'd not heard about, where you offer an incentive for that you just mentioned, an incentive to sell to the workers, like a tax write-off or something.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's going to that's a legislative battle.
Yeah, I was curious, just like if you following it around, like, has there been any progress? Which ones are you backing behind? Are you more of like a go the tax incentive route, or are you more of like there's more energy behind perhaps the right of first refusal, where the workers have the right to buy up the business first?
Oh, well, I mean, in union contracts, you can put right of first refusal. So like but not every business is unionized. You know what I mean? So it's
right.
Like, you know what I mean? So that like I said, it's just I'm behind anything, but the thing is, it's like there's not a lot of momentum in general for co-ops in the United States, but it's growing. Let me just say, like, the year 2021 is much stronger now. Like, you would never invite me on your show 5 years ago, because people would be like, co-ops, what the hell is
that? Who cares?
And and a lot of co-op activists got out of the game because they hit so many walls, so but it's not like that anymore.
Good.
But it's the right of first, I mean, that's something that could be easily changed, because you don't need it's not a legislative thing. It's something you can do within unions, and oh, cool, because even if the union doesn't want to buy it, they don't have to buy it. They just put it gives them a little bit more control without any attachment. So it's like, that's kind of like an easy little term you can put in a contract. The owner might not like it, but at the same time, the union's not necessarily obligated to buy the business, but they have the first right of refusal, and
it's up to them.
Up to them. So that puts the power into their hands. The tax break thing is going to happen if we're going to be serious about this thing. We just need more bottom-up organization, to start pressure. I created a national committee, or like not an official committee, but within the DSA, where, a national worker co-op committee. I talked to like 10, 20 different chapters around the country, so we can at least start like some kind of conversation about, being able to become some kind of pressure group. It's kind of a stagnant group at the moment, but I mean, the thing is, it's because it's really premature. It's just the first person to ever do something like that, like ever, within that organization, because it is a growing organization. I mean, there's Mercora laws, where, are you guys familiar with the Mercora law?
No, I'm not.
No.
All right. Well, let me explain what that is. So,
oh God,
2 minutes left.
Yeah, you guys need, like, I'm gonna warn you, like, I need more than an hour to talk.
We'll just have to have you back on.
Because I need more than an hour, and the reason why is because there's so much content and stuff I have to go over, and because most people don't even know, like, they've never heard of any of this stuff. So
for sure.
Yeah. And I have to it's just kind of a job of me just plowing through all the information. So Mercora law is named after some Italian dude, who's a legislator in, Italy. It's because, like I said, they're in the Constitution of Italy. They talk about worker self-directed enterprises and stuff like that, right? So it's a big deal there. 1985, what they did was they passed this interesting law where you can get your unemployment benefits, just like, they can get it monthly if you wanted, but then they have this other option. You can get it in full if you find like 5 other people that want to start a worker co-op, and they're also on unemployment. So you can use it as startup capital.
Oh, right. That's great. Co-op. That's great.
Now, that's why there's so many co-ops in Italy, is because they have these like funding mechanisms through, like, it's just a really creative way of using state money. And, and so we need something like that. I have someone in Massachusetts that wrote a law. It's going nowhere, but I mean, it's like, it's just there. So, I'm going to hopefully I can get a hold of this law that he wrote, and then I can start distributing it to like people in like Illinois, like you guys, or, people in California here. And I'm going to start, just get the raw materials out there so we can just start doing this, because it's like, we need more mechanisms, for, getting these things financed.
Yeah.
So there's also the public bank of LA is now getting off, it's going to get approved very soon,
Cool.
That's going to be a big triumph, in California, where we can get like co-ops financed, and, so it's
that's great.
Yeah. So there's things rolling here, but it's like, I don't know, it isn't the groundswell that we need, but there's like little like hit and run battles that are being won.
There you go. We got to start somewhere. All right. We are at the end of our show. I think that, so I want to say one thing real quick. I think a lot of it, like we alluded to throughout the show, is that people need to be educated into their own self-worth and the worth of their personal labor, to know that, because I see a lot of submission to like managerial and owner authority and that kind of thing. People are still like ever so thankful that they gave them a job instead of being, thinking that they should be grateful for them giving them their labor, that kind of thing. And I think there's
Thank you, my liege. Thank you,
yeah, yeah, thank you. Like, no, get rid of that feudal thinking. Anyway, so, those are my last words. Calvin, what do you got?
I'm so happy we had this conversation, and just like you mentioned, I wish we could speak longer. Maybe we need to have an extended section of our show for guests that are so cool and willing to give their time and talk about a topic like thoroughly. So, Patrick, you've astonished me with your gracious giving, with your awesome information. So, thank you so much for coming on and talking about worker cooperatives and your organization WORCS.
You're welcome.
Thank you so very much. Everybody, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Patrick, thank you for being our guest. But definitely, this is a very important issue. I mean, just labor in general is a very important issue, especially for the Green Party, since we very much tend towards the socialist disposition. So we definitely want to have you on again because you obviously have a lot more to say. So I've been having frequent guests is a perfect thing to do for this show. But everybody, thanks for tuning in tonight. Till next time, be good, be green.
All right, take care, everyone.